Welcome to Dental Business RX. Practice success in 30 minutes or less.
Thank you for calling ABC Dental.
Do you ever get the feeling that your payroll is too high? And how high is too high? And if it is too high, what should you be doing about it? And that's what I want to talk about in this week's episode of Dental Business RX. What your payroll as a percentage of revenue should be, how to figure out where you are now in your practice, and in the event that you find your payroll is too high, the primary reasons we've found that might be causing that and what to do about it. So dentistry, as far as managing dental overhead, is a game of percentages. And in other words, certain expense categories should not exceed a certain percentage of revenues. And I have a handout which actually explains the different range of percentages for each expense category that you can download on this webpage. We call it the overhead guidelines. So I'm going to take right off that overhead guideline page and I'm going to go straight to the payroll category. And payroll, on our little overhead guidelines, this is something that you can work with, your payroll as a percentage of revenues should not exceed 22.5% of your revenues. Now, couple qualifiers there. That 22.5% does not include the doctor or any associate doctors. That is just your staff, your office, but it does include hygienists, office managers, front desk staff, etc. But it does not include associates or the owner doctor. It also does include payroll taxes. So, the FICA that you pay, the Social Security and Medicare, that 7.65% that you pay on top of an employee's salary, that is included in the 22.5% number. So again, to reiterate, your payroll should not exceed 22.5%. That does include payroll taxes. That does not include the doctor and associate doctors. Now, if you're in Canada and you're listening, we have a lot of Canadian clients. I was not able to come up with a payroll percentage range because that does differ provincially. So I'm going to give you this number. If you are a Canadian dentist, your payroll amount, less the owner, doctor, and associates, should not exceed 20.9%, not including payroll taxes, employer payroll taxes, things like the Canada Pension Plan, employment insurance, or employer health tax. So 20.9%, just gross wages, should not exceed 20.9% of your revenues. So that's where you should be. So if we were to take the numbers and we look at this in the U.S., if you're a doctor and you're collecting $100,000 a month, your payroll should not exceed $22,500. Now, I bring this up because a lot of the newer clients that we see are usually running in the 25 to 30% range unless they are grossly understaffed as a result of the events of the last year and a half. In other words, they had 3 people at the front, and now they have 1 because they just can't hire anybody. Well, yeah, their payroll as a percentage is low, but then their revenues start to follow, so the percentage starts to work itself out. But usually the new client that we see, for the most part, is running in that 25 to 30% range, and that's not good. So 22.5% is more or less where you want to live. So let's apply this to your office. How do you figure this out for yourself? Well, what you would do is you would first want to get a couple of averages. I'm a big believer in when you're doing financial calculations, you want to get a period of time, not just 1 month. You want at least 3 months. I prefer 4 if you're going to run averages, just so you can see some sustained performance. So what I would do if I'm you, I would take 3 or 4 months. Let's just use 3 for our example. So take 3 months of your payroll and 3 months of collections. So let's say I'm recording this podcast in November. So let's say you took October, September, and August. 3 months of collections. What did you collect in those 3 months? And 3 months of payroll. What did I produce, or what did I pay in payroll in those 3 months? From the payroll amount, I would subtract any doctor or associate compensation and any related taxes. Now, I was going to get into a whole thing on the taxes because there's a point at which Social Security tax is cut off, part of that FICA. I'm not going to do that. But let's just keep it simple. Take the doctor and associate compensation off that payroll figure and then average it out, and then take your collections for those 3 months and average it out. So let's say, for example, you come up with your payroll less associate and doctor compensation is $37,000 one month, $38,000 the next month, and $36,000 the month after that. That's a total of $111,000. Divide that by 3 for an average, we come up with a number of $37,000 per month. That's your average monthly payroll. You like how that worked out really? I use round numbers just to keep this simple. Now let's take a look at our collections. So let's say not production. This is a big deal, and I should probably mention this because I've had some people try to clarify, is it production or collections? You can't pay staff with production. Production's great, but unless you collect it from a payroll perspective, it's relatively useless. So we're going to stick with collections here. So you would take the last 3 months of collection. So let's say it was 140, 136, and 138,000 for the last 3 months, which is 414,000. So an average of 138,000 per month. So we have an average payroll of 37,000 and an average collections of 138,000. So now what do we do next to figure out where do we live? What's our payroll percentage? We take that 37,000 payroll and we divide it by 138,000. 37,000. We're going to divide it by 138,000. So we're going to end up with a number less than 1. It's going to give us a percentage. In this case, in my example I'm giving you, we come up with 0.268 or 26.8%. In our example, that would be too high because remember, we want to be at 22.5. Now instead we have 26.8. We're too high by 4.3%. Now, if you look at the basic numbers, 4.3% of your collections, which is how much you're paying in payroll that you're overpaying, would be about almost $6,000 a month, almost $72,000 a year of lost profit that you're paying in excess of what you should be paying for payroll. So now, you could do something, and if you're like most doctors, your payroll percentage is going to be too high unless you're heavily understaffed or you've just been really sharp about how you've managed it. If your payroll is too high, I'm going to give you a little bonus round here. I like to do this with clients. I've looked at probably 3,000 or 4,000 overhead sheets, so I always do this just to kind of give them a little bit more reality on where things are at. If your payroll is too high, I'm going to do a little bonus round here for you. Let's figure out, let's say, so we've done these numbers here I've given you, and your payroll is $37,000 a month, and you're only collecting an average of $138,000. So we would want to take a look at, if your payroll is too high, what should you be collecting to justify this $37,000 a month payroll? So let's take a look at the formula for that. You would take your payroll amount, which in our example is $37,000, and you divide it by 22.5. And then you multiply it by 100. So let's run these numbers. I know this might be difficult if you're listening to this in your car. I'm sorry. There's nothing I can do. But, this is something you can kind of play back later and run through. So we would go, okay, our payroll is $37,000. We divide that by 22.5. The number we come up with is 1644.44. Then we multiply 1644.44 times 100, and we get a number, 164,444. 37,000, our existing payroll, is 22.5% of 164,444. So basically what this tells you is if you're going to pay $37,000 a month in payroll, less the doctor and associate, as we said earlier, you should be collecting $164,444 a month. In our example here, the doc's only collecting, I say only, this is not bad collections, but the expenses are too high. The doc is collecting $138,000 a month. All right, so if you find yourself in this boat, let's say you've done these numbers and you find yourself in this boat and you go, wow, my payroll is 30% or 29% or whatever. What should you do about it? I mean, not normally, but I would say in a large percentage of cases when I show somebody this, they go, should I just fire a bunch of people? I'm like, no, not necessarily. I mean, I'm not saying you shouldn't. There might be cases where you might have a problem staff member who's causing issues in the practice, bad customer service, etc. But usually there's a few other things that contribute. That would sort of be my last resort. And I really would only let somebody go if they're not performing, right? But let's take a look at what are the usual culprits that cause payroll as a percentage to go too high. So I've got 5 points specifically that tend to jack payroll too high. Let's take a look at them in order. So the first one is your practice has too much managed care, too many reduced fee plans. Maybe you have a lot of PPOs. Maybe you have HMOs. Now, the problem with managed care is, and I got into this very heavily in episode 7, dropping plans, so I'm not going to rehash all of that, but let's look at just from a financial perspective where it starts to cause problems. If your normal fee for a crown is $1,400 and you're doing a crown for $800, and the idea that sort of floated into people's heads is, well, I'll just do a lot. I'm going to beat it all by doing, with volume. That doesn't necessarily work out. But so let's play this forward. You normally do a crown for $1,400. You're doing this crown for $800. So you're taking a hit of roughly $600 per crown. I don't know what that percentage is. I don't have my calculator here. It's a lot. It's almost 50%. Well, your employee, your assistant who's helping you with that, do that crown is not also taking a payroll hit. Your lab is not charging you less because it's a PPO crown. Your landlord isn't charging you less for that time you're using in the practice because it's a PPO crown. Your scheduler didn't charge you less in order to schedule that patient. The only one taking the hit is you. So you'll artificially depress the fees in your practice. And if you do that, like let's take this example earlier where I have the practice collecting 138 with the 37,000 payroll. Let's say if that practice was at full fee, they'd be doing 170. Well, then it all works out, see? So managed care will depress your fees, but the other fees aren't going to depress at the same time. It doesn't work out. So that can make your payroll go wonky as well as your other expense categories as a percentage of revenues because you're getting less revenue than you should for what you're doing. That's culprit number one. And I do recommend listen to episode 7. We talk about getting out of plans. It's definitely something I recommend that you do. Second point that causes payroll as a percentage to go too high is poor case acceptance. Now, you might be asking, Jeff, you haven't talked about staff yet. I am going to be talking about staff. Those are the next 3. But poor case acceptance will cause your payroll as a percentage to go high because you're making less revenue than you should be. And I use that word should because it actually is applicable here. You should be making more. There's a difference between, it would be cool if I made more to you should be making more. So let's take an example. Let's say you're presenting a case, it's 6 crowns, all right? And let's say your crown fee is $1,200, so $7,200 is the case. You're presenting 6 crowns. So there's a couple of issues here. So let's say it takes you 20 minutes to present those 6 crowns. And at the end of it, the patient does nothing. Or let's say, like a lot of patients, they'll say, oh yeah, the 6 crowns sound great, doc. I only want to do what insurance pays this year. Well, insurance is only going to contribute to 2 of those because they have, let's say, $1,000 or a $1,500 max. All right, it's fully covered, right? So at that point, you're in that 20 minutes, you closed $2,400 worth of treatment instead of $7,200. If you actually were good, you were better. I don't want to say you're bad at this, but if you got better at treatment presentations, in that same 20 minutes, you could have gotten the patient to accept all 6. So there's no additional expenditure of time for you there. But instead of that 20 minutes turning into a $2,400 case, that 20 minutes turns into a $7,200 case. And this may sound like, if you're not familiar with our company, like a pipe dream, like that just can't happen. That happens all the time. We see it with our clients. They just get better at communicating. We teach this in the MGE communication and sales seminars. It's not difficult to do. It's actually a lot easier than you think. And one point I'll make with this is if you tell a patient they need 6 crowns, there's more of a philosophical aspect of this. If you present 6 crowns and you tell a patient they need 6 crowns, so you've just told me I need 6 crowns. All right. So then I hem and haw a little bit. I hedge and I go, well, it's a lot of money. How much will my insurance cover? Well, your insurance yearly maximum is $1,500 and they'll cover 50% of each crown. So I do the math in my head and I go, okay, so 2 of those crowns at $600 each is what the insurance company's going to pay. I'm only going to get full coverage on 2. If I did 3, I'm only going to get $300 for the 3rd. And I may have had a cleaning this year, so I may not even have $300 left. So I'm going to only want to do 2 because that's what insurance is going to cover. So you tell me, well, insurance will cover 2. All right. So I go, well, look, I want to save some money, so I only want to do what insurance covers. So now what you do next tells me a lot about you as a patient. This is from my patient perspective. If you immediately go, okay, great, we'll just do, this one, and then we'll do the one next year and the one after that. So you sat there in the beginning and told me how important all 6 of these crowns are, right? But now in 30 seconds, I tell you I don't want to do them all right now, and you go, oh, we'll just do these 2. So obviously the 6 crowns weren't all that important, were they? And or the other 4 that you told me I don't have to do right now aren't as important. Don't be surprised if I start wondering, well, how important are the 2 you just told me I have to do? How important is any of this? From a trust perspective, it's not the ideal situation to do with a patient. I'm not saying this is never going to happen where you're only going to do what insurance covers. Sure, that's going to happen at times, but there's a bit more you want to do with that to make sure it's not just an insurance-driven decision. It's a health-driven decision. That's where we want to live. So yeah, poor case acceptance will lower your revenues, which of course, being that payroll is a percentage of revenues, you're not lowering the other expenses, will make your payroll percentage too high. So now, let's get to the staff-related issues. So there's 3. The first one is your payroll could be too high as a percentage if you are paying the person instead of the position, paying the person instead of the position. So let's say for your area, the going rate for a receptionist is $20, but you've had a receptionist who's worked for you for 7 years and you're paying them $30. And you'll see this especially in practices that have been around for 30 plus years and you've had employees for a long time. They just keep getting incremental raises and you have a dental assistant making $40 an hour. But you're paying this receptionist $30. Now, this is a problem because there's only a certain amount. I'm not saying staff shouldn't be paid well. And I believe in incentive programs too. I'm a big fan of those because then if the office does well, everybody does well. But from a base salary perspective, which you are on the hook for, there's only a certain amount that each position in the office is going to be worth. You know, if, for instance, if you took a hygienist and hygiene pay has gone, it's skyrocketed. I was talking to a doctor yesterday where the average in 2019 for a hygienist in their area was $40 an hour, and now it's $56. That's almost a 50, actually more than a 50, almost a 50% increase. Sorry, my math failed down me there for a second. That's huge. So each position is only worth a certain amount. Okay, no matter how good the person gets, there's a low range and a high range. So if I have a receptionist and they keep going up, and let's say I go, my cutoff for reception is $25 an hour. They get to that 25 point and they want to make more and more and more. Well, I have incentive programs. Okay, they can make it that way. Or what I'm going to need them to do is move up within the organization and take on more responsibility. Maybe they take the position above reception in my office because my office is expanding. They have some open mobility. They can make some money. But you hit a point where you keep just paying the person as opposed to the position. You're going to start to have problems because then positions go out of whack and then your payroll as a percentage goes high. What I'd recommend if you're wondering, what should I, especially in this market, what should I be paying somebody for X position in my area? You can go to the website salary.com. Salary.com, you look at your zip code, you look at the position, and it'll give you a low, median, and high range for each position. I haven't looked at it recently. I don't know how updated it is with how the wages have been spiraling into the stratosphere recently, but that'll at least give you an idea of this is too low, this is too high, this is the middle. All right, so paying the person out positions, point 3. What's point 4? Point 4 is misallocation of personnel. So what do I mean by that, misallocation of personnel? Let me give you a couple different scenarios. Let's say you have a practice with 3 doctors, 6 hygienists, 8 dental assistants, and 1 person at the front desk. So get that, envision that for a second. 3 docs, 6 hygienists, 8 assistants, 1 person at the front. That 1 person at the front would not be able to keep 3 docs and 6 hygienists busy. That's just not going to happen. They don't have enough hands and ability to make phone calls. You're going to need more people up at the front. So that office will underproduce. And especially in the scenario I just gave you, you got a lot of providers who are higher ticket personnel. Your percentages of payroll is going to go up. Like in a case like that, you need more people at the front, probably less people in the back. I've seen the reverse of this. I saw one office where they had an office manager, a financial coordinator, a receptionist, and a scheduler, and 1 doctor and 1 assistant. Like, why do I need all those people at the front to fill up 1 doctor and 1 assistant? And the doctor was, running around on roller skates practically between 3 chairs. There, you need a hygienist in that practice and maybe 1 less person up front. So when you have too many people in one area and not enough people in another where you can actually support the growth of the practice, that will throw off your payroll. As far as what you should have where, that we're getting into the whole subject of organization and how to structure your organization, which is a whole other discussion for another podcast. But that's the culprit number 4. Let's look at number 5. Underproducing personnel. Underproducing personnel. In other words, for lack of a better way of explaining it, let's say you have somebody who's supposed to produce, X amount, and they're producing half of X with whatever it is that they do. If they do reactivation or recall, they're scheduling half the patients they should. Or if they do collections, their collection percentage is low. They're underproducing. Now, there's a number of reasons why someone could be underproducing. They may just not be a productive personnel. You will run into those. We've all seen personnel like this before, especially somebody who comes into the practice. I've seen this scenario numerous times where you have 10 people in the practice and they all get along, and you add employee number 11 and now everybody wants to kill each other because 11 is going around stirring the pot with everybody. This person probably just should not be employed in your practice. And, I'm not an employment attorney. I'm not a tax attorney. I'm not any of these. I'm not an attorney, period, or an accountant. But I feel pretty confident saying that, for me, the most important thing with personnel is not, who they know or even their level of experience it's can they perform? If I have somebody who's performing, that's why they're there. If they're there and they're not performing, that's when we're going to start having problems rather. And by performing, I mean doing what is expected of them. So if I have somebody who is not performing, that's a problem. Now, they could also not be performing though, not because of, that they're just not a productive person, but because they're poorly trained, or the office is badly organized, or the office is inefficient. I've seen that a lot. As a matter of fact, I think we tend to be, as a matter of fact, in a lot of cases where you see a non-productive personnel, it actually isn't that they don't have the ability to do it. It's that the structure in the office isn't conducive with training and proper onboarding and things like this to actually get them productive. Most people, the majority of people, 80% of the people you hire want to do a good job. They really do. I know sometimes it's hard to believe. You might think, well, no, 20%, 10% only want to do a good job. No, 80% of the people coming in want to do a good job. Then it's your job to get them able to do that good job by arming them with the proper training and knowledge and information to be able to do that job. This is why, I try not to spend these podcasts talking about our services, but to give you kind of a little bit of an insight into what we do, with MGE, when we do the MGE Power Program, which you've probably heard of, that's a bunch of training for the doctor and the office manager, but part of that training is how to organize the practice, manage the practice, and onboard and train staff. We also have an online on-demand platform called DDS Success, where it's a bunch of staff training, scheduler training, treatment coordinator training, etc., to actually get these people up and running and functional as quickly as possible, because most people want to do a good job. But again, if you have that scenario where you have a non-productive personnel, or you have a situation where people aren't being trained properly, which makes them non-productive, then you're going to have your payroll as a percentage become too high. You're going to be paying too much and your office is underproducing. And one last comment I'll make on this. So there's two things to look at, and we get into the whys behind this on the MGE program. Let's say you have a receptionist and they're doing a very poor job. Let's say their conversion rate for incoming new patient calls is terrible. They're not very nice with patients. The other staff don't get along with them well. And all you can think of, let's say you and your office manager are talking pretty regularly about how you'd like to replace this receptionist because they're just not doing a good job. All right. I've seen lots of people in that boat. All right. So you look at this and you go, but I'm not going to replace them until I find somebody else. They're damaging to the practice, but it's better to have a warm body there than nobody. Well, the first thing I'll tell you is that is absolutely not true. You are better off with nobody there. I'd rather your dental assistant was answering the phone. If you have somebody who is just damaging to your office, patently damaging, they're just not doing a good job, they're creating problems with patients, you're better off having nobody than having somebody who's doing that. So that's point number one. The second point is, if you have somebody who's, we talk about the problem patient in one of our seminars, which is 20% of your patient, potential patient base are going to cause trouble. Well, you can apply the same thing to personnel. We explain why on the MGE program. But if I have a personnel who's causing trouble in the office, like this person just really should not be in my practice, and I keep them in my practice, I am sending a very bad message to the rest of my team. Because number one, I'm going to have an environment which is not very fun. It's not very upbeat because this person's making the environment worse. There's backbiting, there's, drama, etc. And the longer I allow that to persist in that environment, in my office environment, the longer or the more chance I have of other staff just finally getting fed up and leaving. And I also set just a very bad precedent for the other staff. I have somebody who's non-performing, not doing a good job, and the other staff can see this and nothing happens to them. What's to say they can't do the same thing? It's just not a good scene to have in your practice. But again, when you have that type of a thing going on, it will cause your practice to be underproductive, which again will throw your payroll as a percentage up too high. All right, so I think I've run on enough about this. I recommend that you take a look at what your payroll percentage is and how it's all working out in your office. If you have questions about this stuff, we are more than willing to help you. You can contact us here at MGE at 800-640-1140. You can visit us online at mgeonline.com. We can do a free consultation with you if you want. You want us to take a look at your payroll. We can tell you it's too high, too low. We can even ask you questions about why do you have this person doing this, and do what we can to help. Guys, do great, and we will see you at the next episode.